Among the many disruptions brought on by the pandemic are those related to learning among children. For more on this, I have Professor Kim Hyun-chul at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology live on the line. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Hi, Sunny.
Now,
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome, Professor Kim. But before we touch upon the challenges within the learning environment amid COVID-19, do briefly tell us about the pandemic situation in Hong Kong, Professor Kim. I understand authorities recorded a record high of over 56,800 new infections this past Thursday.
Right. So Hong Kong has more than 50,000 cases yesterday, but the experts calculate the actual number of COVID-19 infection is about 5 to 6 times bigger than the confirmed number, which means that every day we have about 300,000 people newly infected. Korea is 7 times bigger than Hong Kong in terms of number of population. So this number is equivalent to 350,000 in Korea.
Right. Professor Kim, authorities there have spoken about plans to conduct compulsory testing of the city's 7.4 million residents, and schools, I understand, have been shut down to be used as response centers. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Right. So today, Chief Executive Arirang has insisted the whole city lockdown will not happen. But the local schools are all closed since February, while international schools in Hong Kong are doing online.
Right, and staying within the academic arena then, I believe you recently conducted a study, Professor Kim, on the repercussions of restricting access to education on Korean students amid this particular pandemic. Could you tell us a bit about your findings now?
Right, yes. I studied the impact of school restrictions in Korea on academic outcomes of high school students. In the beginning of the research, I was really worried about the learning loss in Korea. But I find out that on average, there is no such negative impact, which is good news. However, I also find that high performers, they performed even higher during the pandemic, but the low performers performed worse. What does it mean? Inequality of education outcomes significantly increases.
Right, and compared to their counterparts elsewhere, Professor Kim, do Korean schools possess certain features perhaps that makes them or renders them more vulnerable to pandemic-related restrictions or not?
Right, so the number of school days in 2020 in Korea was about 105 in high schools and 86 in middle schools. Before the pandemic, it was about 190. The number of school days during the pandemic is lower than the more advanced countries, like most European countries and Japan. But the corresponding numbers in developing countries are much lower than the South Korea. So Korea was kind of trying to doing well, but not as good as the more advanced countries.
Right. Professor Kim, there are concerns about sending children to school amid Omicron, given the low vaccination rate among them here in the country. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So that is the biggest misunderstanding. So the first reason is that the school closure has no impact in terms of COVID-19 infection. Why school closure is not helpful? That's because students not going to school does not mean they stay at home all the time. If they meet the friends outside the school closure is meaningless. The school that follows the social distancing could be safer than to the children. And I want more reasons. Omicron virus is not dangerous for students. Do you know that how many school-age children passed away due to the COVID-19 infection in the last 2 years? The answer is 1. Only one student passed away because of the COVID-19 infection. But what about the car accident? How many students have died because of the car accidents in Korea? It's 100. In the last 2 years, 200 students killed because of the car accident. But nobody decided not to go to the school because of the fear of the car accidents. But actually, car accident is 200 times more dangerous than the COVID-19 infection for our students.
Right. So, Professor Kim, essentially speaking, you believe that access to schools should be allowed amid the pandemic as children are less vulnerable to severe illness amid the presence of Omicron then?
Absolutely.
Right. Now, keeping in mind that quite a number of them here in the country have not been vaccinated, what safety protocols would you then recommend for safety within the academic arena?
Right. And do you think it is possible to avoid COVID-19 exposure? Exposure and infection is different. Exposure is you meet the viruses, and infection is you got infected viruses. And number of infections in Korea is now about almost on average 300,000 per day. The actual number is 2 million per day. How long the infected people are contagious? It's about 7 days. That means that 14 million people, 30% of population in Korea, can spread out the virus as of now. This means that it is almost impossible to avoid the exposure to the viruses. But if you are vaccinated, then you are much less likely to infect it. So exposure to the viruses is inevitable. So that is number one. And what are going to do at the school? As the Omicron virus is not dangerous, my recommendation is that although it is mentally difficult, just forget about the viruses at least for the students. If your children is sick, take a rest at home. Go to the hospital. If your children is very sick, PCR test is not necessary. Nothing gonna change nothing gonna change for your children when they detect the Omicron virus infection. It just jeopardizes the school program. So my strong recommendation is just forget about the viruses for the students.
Right, I see. All right, Professor Kim, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts then.
Thank you.